Okay. And
You want
forward.
me to make a picture of you?
No, I was just, my mom always said, anytime your picture's up on the wall, make a picture of it. So, thank you. All right, now, is this voice okay? Can you hear me? All right, because that is always the issue. Well, this has been a great few days. It feels already like a week or so. It's just a couple of days, but thanks for putting this together and including me and asking me to be a part of this. Although I'm going to walk away a little bit damaged because from Giuliano's presentation, if it works, it's obsolete. And all this stuff that's been working for a long time, I'm a little worried about it now. But it's been a wonderful gaggle of photo people, both up here and out there, and I really appreciate the chance to be here. And like a lot of you, I was a curious kid, and when I was 16, my mother urged me to do something besides just be in school, and I signed up to be on the yearbook. And the yearbook then asked, do you want to be on the business staff? No. Art staff? Probably not. Design staff or the photo staff. So it was like the first three were non-starters, so I checked photo and they accepted me. And the next September when I came back to school, the very first day, Mr. Blackham, who was in charge of helping coach the photo team, I saw him, I went in the dark room, and there were 3 or 4 of us in the dark room, lights out, the column of light coming off the enlarger, and he's making a picture of the French Club. So it wasn't going to be a picture that would ever win an award, but the first time you see that white piece of photo paper go into the developer and an image come up out of it, that's magic. And that magic for me has never gone away. All right, let's see if this works. Okay. Please, davidburnett.com welcomes you. Night and day, 24 hours. Okay. I got through high school, and in college, my freshman year in college, I had ideas of being an engineer and building rockets to go to the moon with the Apollo program. And that got washed out when I had a calculus professor who mumbled, which mumbling is like when you're just down here and you can't quite understand what they're saying. You can't learn calculus that way, but you could learn photography. And somewhere along the way, my freshman year, a very enterprising young man came through the dormitory and said, anybody want to buy a press card for $5? And I stepped up, gave him my $5, and a week later, I was on the sidelines of the Denver Broncos professional football team, and I used that press card for years, getting into places that I probably shouldn't have been. But it was an understanding that being a press photographer lets you see all these things that most other people are going to have to rely on you to show them what happened. And I think combined a little bit of talent and a lot of curiosity will go a long way to be a press, or in my case, a magazine photographer. I mainly worked for magazines over the years, a little bit for newspapers, but let's see here. So 20 years ago, I got assigned by Time magazine to do a story on Abraham Lincoln. It was the 200th anniversary of his birth. And I went all over the eastern U.S. and places where Lincoln had been and photographed all kinds of stuff. And the very last thing I did was to go to the American Library of Congress, this great, huge state library, and photograph this 8 by 10 inch glass plate that had been taken at just after the Battle of Antietam. And in American Civil War history, this is a very, very famous picture. And the conservator put on white gloves and is holding this priceless piece of 8x10 glass. And as I'm kind of hovering over it, over a little light box, all I can think of was, don't sneeze and drop your camera and break that priceless piece of 8x10 glass. So I managed to get through without breaking it. I get home, put it in Photoshop, because now I'm already kind of getting into the digital world. And I pull up the picture and I hit Command I for invert. And in this magical thing that it does, it converted a negative to a positive. And how many people here have ever been in a dark room or made a print? Okay, that's pretty good turnout. That's good. So you understand that in photography, white is black and black is white and gray is gray. It's a very different way of seeing the world than most people have. And I think in some ways we're gifted to understand that the world can exist in that way. So I got kind of tied up with Abraham Lincoln. There is this group of people, there's a club for everything. And there's this group called the Abraham Lincoln Presenters. And they all think they're tall and skinny and have a beard and can recite the Gettysburg Address, which is probably Lincoln's most famous speech. And when you show up as the photographer, like magical things happen. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what to expect. But when you get 50 people, all of whom think they look like Abraham Lincoln together, you can choose one, a tall one, have them walk over here 10 feet, and it's like it's 1865 all over again. This is a little shout out to a wonderful picture by an AFP photographer named Yuri Cortez. And on the day that the Pope was coming to Guanajuato, Mexico, as always happens with a Pope trip, people are waiting for the Pope mobile, and they're all lined up in the morning, and they've all got their flags, but they're there for 3 or 4 hours, and nothing is going on. And you're just waiting for the Pope. It happens everywhere the Pope goes. Well, that particular morning, this little dog kind of wandered into the road and just started to walk his way down the road. And I'm kind of a dog person, so I really fell for this picture. But the dog starts walking, and all these people that have been sitting around for hours with nothing to do start waving their flags and cheering for this little dog. And the dog is starting to pick up his pace a little bit. And it is said of this picture that if the dog thinks the parade is for him, then the parade is for him. So I love the humanity that is in this, or maybe it's the dogmanity that is in this picture. It's something, there's a spirit to that little guy giving back to the people who are cheering. And it's the kind of picture that I would give anything to have made myself. But hats off to Yuri Cortez for that picture. This is Edward R. Murrow, who was an American radio journalist living in London during World War II. And while I love photography and I have been a real student of photojournalism over the years, the radio reports that Ed Murrow did during the war back to the American audience are the kind of journalism that I hope my pictures strive to meet. Doesn't always work out, but nothing ever does. This is a little insert to remind all you Gen Zers that you did not, as soon as you got your first iPhone, invent the selfie. We had decades of looking for mirrors. And wherever you would find a mirror, you'd find somebody making a selfie in my generation. even if it was just on the window of a car. That's, yeah, it did, okay, they don't always work out. Okay, well, we admit that. Okay, there we go. And this is about, I don't know, about 20 years ago. A friend of mine at a magazine called American Photographer, they decided to do a spoof issue, like a joke issue. And they had one of the photographers construct a thing that would help you when there was a big gaggle of photographers and you're all holding your camera up, just trying to hope you get a picture, what we call a Hail Mary in the trade. And this thing was known as the Hail Mary Helper. And all right, we're doing, I'm not caught up. I guess we're not caught up here. Let's see, there we are. That's me as a high school kid with my aunt's Leica that she got in Germany in the 1930s, and which she gave to me when I started taking photographs. And that's me about 50 years later with the same camera. And can we slow this thing down? It's not syncing to the, or I'm not syncing to it, I don't know which. Anyway, I published this picture on Facebook, and a friend of mine wrote some very snarky comments about where all of my forehead wrinkles came from. You know, I accidentally drank the D76, things like that. Anyway, it's okay. When I was in high school, I was working for a little weekly newspaper, and one day driving in, grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, out in the western U.S., and there was this amazing lightning storm, and I happened to have my camera and a tripod in the car, kind of a reminder that you should always have a camera with you if you're a photographer, because you never know where the next picture is coming. And these amazing lightning strikes, and I got out and I set it up. I even had a cable release for my old Yashica mat, which was kind of like the poor man's Rolleiflex. And I opened the shutter and put my hand in front of it, and when the lightning would go, I moved my hand like this to let the light in, and essentially determining that my hand was faster than the speed of light. And I made a print the next morning, and I walked into the editor's office and kind of tossed it on his desk. And it was the only time in all the years I've been doing this that I heard somebody say, "Stop the presses, we got to put this on page 1," which they did. And it was like one of those great moments in personal journalism when your picture actually made something happen. Some pretty good lightning. This is a story I did like that same summer on the ballet company. And here's one thing I would say. One of the things, especially now living that we do in the digital age, sharing your work has never been easier. And I was a really bad note taker. I never got anybody's names. My captions, when I would turn in my film, were always pretty terrible. But I wish, this was an afternoon shooting pictures at the ballet in Salt Lake City, and beautiful young dancers, and this one picture which ended up running in our paper. And years later, 50 years later, I wanted to find this woman and get her a print, and managed, my sister's husband is very good on Ancestry.com, and we found her, and her daughter said that she's older, she's kind of got a little senility, but she still likes to put on her ballet outfit and go pop around the house a little bit. I just wish I had been smart enough and capable enough of getting her a print when she was 25 years old and could appreciate it. But we live, whether it's with your phone or with your cameras, we have the ability to share and to give back work that we never had before. And it's something, two things. Don't be stingy about sharing your pictures with the people you photograph, and carry a notebook and a pen so you can write down names and emails and phone numbers and eventually be in contact with people again. Someday you'll think, boy, he was really right about that one. This is Craig Breedlove, who in the beginning of my last year of high school, I was basically a 16-year-old kid with a yashika mat and a Pentax. He set the world land speed record of 406 miles an hour out at the Bonneville Salt Flats, which was just 2 hours from my home, and I used to go to the Salt Flats quite a bit. And my older brother, became a Wall Street financial guy and used to say, well, photographers are dorks. And I don't know if I have to translate the word dork or if that is evident. But I was trying to say, well, Tom, I don't think photographers are dorks. As a matter of fact, I have a picture from Craig Breedlove, who holds the world land speed record. At the time, no one had ever driven faster in a car than this guy. And he says, best wishes always, which means today, because today is always. It's part of always. How's that for being a photo dork? So get your pictures signed and autographed when you can. Someday it'll pay a big dividend. I had a summer job with Time magazine when I was in college, started shooting for Time, ended up, after I graduated, I moved to Miami, Florida, working out of the Time Life Bureau there. And the big story of the summer of 1969 was launching our rocket to the moon, men on the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walking on the moon for the first time in human history. And I had received all this film back from Time years before, and it just sat in a box. And in 2009, I got a phone call saying, there's a publisher that wants to do a book about Apollo, and we need your pictures. Where are they? Well, I went downstairs that night, and I opened, by accident, the first box I opened, that envelope is sitting on top. And I had all this Ektachrome film, and I started looking through the stuff. Those are my handwritten captions from the summer of 1969. And I found all these pictures that I had totally forgotten about for 40 years. And I scanned a bunch of them, sent the scans up to New York. And the next morning, we talked to Smithsonian Magazine, and we had a deal for a 6-page story that would run in July at the time of the anniversary. And it was just so fun to see that pictures have a life. It was a hugely historic thing to go to the moon. So hundreds of thousands of people camped out, and they came to Florida. They wanted their kids to see the launch of this rocket. They wanted to share that with their kids. And people showed up in all kinds of cars and buses. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, a couple of hours before the launch, you could see across the water, you could see the Saturn V rocket bathed in light, waiting to go 3 hours later. But people were just gathered, and it was like not anything that ever made sense at the time, but in the years since, it's made great sense to me that the Woodstock Festival was 3 weeks later in the summer of '69. This was kind of Woodstock for moon lovers. And that old car, that is the kind of technology that went to the moon. even though it doesn't look like it. That's the technology of having only one ladies' room within 2 miles. That would not happen today. And kids with their transistor radios, everybody wanted to be plugged in. And romance was in the air. This is my daughter's favorite picture. We've labeled it, "If you can't get lucky the night before a moonshot, it probably won't happen." And these guys arrived late. I'm convinced they slept through the launch, but we'll never know. And everybody had this is what an Instamatic camera looks like on the left. Everybody uses the word Instamatic. That's an actual Instamatic camera. There are actually 3 of them, and a guy with an old Zeiss 35 millimeter. But everybody was looking east into the sun at the moment that the rocket went up, and there became this kind of the Apollo moon launch salute. There it is. Everybody had one hand up to keep the sun out of their eyes as they watched the rocket going up. And like everybody else, I'm there just to photograph the people. It was a real humanitarian event. But at one point I said, I don't want to come all the way up here and not see the rocket. And I turned around, made one shot of the rocket, and went back to photographing the people. So this was my friend Jean-Pierre Lafont, who was then a gamma photographer, who always had his little 2-step ladder with him. And we had wandered out into the water to look back at this crowd. And this is more of the crowd. So when Smithsonian Magazine ran this story 40 years later, it made a bit of a bustle amongst the people who were in the magazine. And I got a message from a guy saying, my sister said I had to go get Smithsonian because there's a picture of me and my wife in there, and we had gone to see the rocket launch. And he said, yeah, I'm the guy in the green shirt in the middle. Said, is there any way we could get a copy of this picture? So in 2009 is the beginning of the digital age, and we're trying to keep a little bit of control of our digital files. And I wrote him back and I said, well, you know, we're trying not to just send everything here willy-nilly, but hey, you're a hero in your family for being in Smithsonian Magazine. Here's a file so he could make a nice print. I said, by the way, if you're in my picture, maybe I'm in your picture. Did you guys have a camera that day? And 40 years later, his wife later described this to me. It's like I was looking everywhere and finally found one old shoebox that had some negatives. And that's Jean-Pierre on his ladder and me in my geeky white jeans as the NASA official helicopter is flying over. And I did a show in 2019, 5-6 years ago, in San Francisco. And they came, and after 50 years, I finally got to meet these people. And he's still partial to green checkered shirts, so some things don't change. But it was one of those stories that kind of spread out over the decades, and as a reminder to keep track of your pictures, because the longer you wait, the more valuable your pictures are going to be. That same year in 2019, I tried to photograph all the surviving Apollo astronauts, several of whom have passed away since we shot this picture. But it was like a great reunion to get all these guys together and to try and make a picture or two. And now they're just kind of like a nice old grandpa, but these are the people that went to the moon. That's Buzz Aldrin, who was the second guy on the moon. He just married a 30-year-old about 3 months ago. Got to give the guy credit. So I went to this big salute to the space program out in Seattle that a friend of mine was helping to organize, because I was trying to track down one of the astronauts who refused to ever get back to me when I was trying to arrange to photograph the guy. And my friend said, oh, they're all going to be here. So I ran into the guy having a cocktail the night during this big event. And I said, hey, what are you doing tomorrow morning? He said, well, I've got to get my car at 9 o'clock and go see my sister. I said, how about 8:48, you come out to get your car and give me 2 minutes. So this is me with my phone trying to see how the light looks by valet parking, because even astronauts have to wait 5 minutes for their car at valet parking. And ooh, come on, there we go. So these guys, one by one, these astronauts kept coming out to get their cars. And as they did, I'd grab them, put them over against the wall, and get my 30 seconds. Sometimes, if it's the right 30 seconds, you don't need a lot more. That's Bill Anders, the guy that shot the picture of the Earthrise behind the moon. Very famous picture. This is the guy who came up with failure is not an option on Apollo 13. If you ever saw that movie, you know that one. And this is the Gene Cernan, who I had tried so hard to get. And he had to, he gave me 1 minute, and then he had to go to his sister's house. But you don't need more than a minute if it's the right minute. And that's Mike Collins, who on Apollo 11 was the one that stayed up in the spacecraft while Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. No one had ever been more alone in the history of humanity than when he was on the backside of the moon, all alone in that Apollo capsule. And he seemed to be pretty good with it. And when they launch a rocket, every contrail has its own little signature, and that's one of my favorites. Well, after Apollo and living in Miami for a while, I was looking for a place where there was more stories going on, and I had a friend who had worked for Life magazine who came back from Vietnam and said, there's still a lot of freelance work out there. So I moved out to Saigon in 1970 thinking maybe I'd stay a couple of months, and ended up spending 2 years there working for Time and Life magazine. And well, we'll just kind of go through these. And again, I wish I had the names of these guys. I never wrote down anybody's name. It was catastrophic in terms of my own personal desire to be able to be in touch with people that I photograph. But the lesson is learned. I'd love to know where these guys are now. They all look so young. They were so young. It's on an aircraft carrier. And amid the battle stations, somebody would go out and put a peace sign up on a helicopter landing pad. The thing about being a photographer is that you'd end up going to a base and you'd see a bunch of guys hanging around, and they'd kind of ask you like, now wait a minute, you don't have to be here? They all had to be there. And the fact that you were there as a journalist and you didn't have to be there kind of created this sense of respect for the fact that you showed up when you didn't have to in some crummy place. And I've never gotten over that, never gotten over that appreciation. You know, you go out and sit on the makeshift toilet hoping you could finish a chapter in your book before the next rocket landed. The comedian Bob Hope used to do trips to see the troops around the world, and this was at a Bob Hope show with hundreds of guys screaming at the cute dancing women who were part of his show. Some shoeshine boys at a program for orphans, Vietnamese kids. A couple of pictures from Saigon. In the spring of 1972, 3 years before the war actually ended by the North Vietnamese taking Saigon, but it looked pretty dicey there for a while, and the battles were heavy and thick the whole spring of 72. A lot of civilian casualties. But then sometimes you'd walk into a barracks and the picture was there waiting for you. You know, some people have asked me, oh, did you set up those bullets? You didn't have to. The stuff was there. All you had to do was show up and pay attention. This was me with more than my usual number of cameras. We had just received a North Vietnamese mortar, and my friend, also a photographer, slightly wounded, and I grabbed all of his cameras as well as my own to try and get him out of there. And this is us leaving that zone. Oh, come on. Okay, I don't know. Here, we'll try it again. Houston, we have a problem. Oh. Up. Okay, I don't know. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, thanks. Oh. Okay. Which button do I hit? That goes ahead. Okay, I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay. All right. That's thumb in place. This was a story which has been in the news quite a bit the last 6 months. I happened to be in this little village when the North Vietnamese troops were attacking South Vietnamese troops on the edge of this little village, and they called in a South Vietnamese Air Force plane to try and get the bad guys, quote unquote. And they dropped their canisters of napalm, and they dropped them in the wrong place. They dropped them right next to the village pagoda, which is where many of the people in the village had taken refuge. And it became probably, what came from this is probably the most famous picture of the Vietnam War. This is the pagoda down at the end of the road. And an injured guy who had been brought out from there, South Vietnamese. Now on the right there is a photographer named nekā. And if any of you have been following the whole story about a movie that's been made called The Stringer, which alleges that not nekā took what is this, I'll show you in a second, this very famous picture of these kids running away from the battle. This is the picture. And my memory is such that I think that Nick did take that picture, and I've been one of those people who have been very unhappy that World Press Photo, for example, has taken his name as the author of the picture off of it and saying there's way too much doubt. Well, I haven't seen the movie, even though the producer of the movie called me 2 years ago and we had a long conversation about it. And I'm not quoted in, well, apparently I am quoted in the movie. I haven't seen the movie yet, but it's one of these things where 50 years later, they are making all these suppositions about what supposedly happened. And it was one of those terrible days when what was maybe supposed to happen didn't go at all right. And all these civilians were wounded. You can see little Kim Phuc here, how badly burned she was. And an older woman with a little baby who ended up dying from his burns that day. It was just a grisly, terrible day. And now, 50 odd years later, it's being revisited in this film with some very dubious reception, I have to say. I haven't seen the movie yet, so I can't really comment on the movie other than what I've heard about it, but I don't think the case they're making is very definitive. And, the guy in the middle with the poncho on is pouring the water of his canteen over the burns of this little girl. And then they're trying to get the kids back to a car and get them to a hospital. Well, I didn't see that little girl for 35 years. And this is Nikot on the right. Whatever else about the source of the picture, he's become extremely close, like an uncle, to the little girl and her whole family. And they came to Washington, D.C., and we met up there. It was the first time I had seen her in ages. And she's come out of this as a spokesperson for victims of war and has a foundation that tries to work with children to relieve the pain of children in war. And she's a wonderful lady. And this was at a dinner 10 years ago to kind of celebrate the fact that she was still alive and all these people that had helped her along the way were still there. And this woman was then a young French-Canadian nurse who looked after her in the hospital in Saigon. And it was a real reunion of people from that terrible day. And this was Nick and her just a couple of years ago at the 50th anniversary back in 2022. So I don't know, you're going to hear about this film and you're going to hear more about it. I am not personally convinced, and maybe we'll figure out some way. About 10 or 12 years ago, the Americans finally created a monument to the American Nursing Corps and to the women who had worked and died in Vietnam. And the day of that dedication, I made this picture, and it was kind of like so many of these moments, years after the war, you wonder if they really have any meaning. But to the people who were there, they're very meaningful. This is what the finish line looks like at the Olympic Games. 6 rows, 300 2.8, 400 2.8, 600 f4. Every telephoto lens in the world, there's at least 10 of them in there. And people are getting lined up to shoot the finish line. And why the finish line? Because a lot of dramatic things happen there. But it's not the only place where stuff happens. And at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics, which was my first Olympic Games, I spent a lot of that last week in and around the finish line trying to figure out one thing or another. Where can I make an interesting picture? Where is it going from here? And I ended up just saying the afternoon, last Friday of the game. So this was like 13 days already into the Olympics. I said, okay, I'm over the finish line. I'm going to find somewhere else. And I walked down the side of the stadium, and halfway down there was a bench with 2 photographers sitting on it. I said, hey guys, you got room for one more? They said, yeah, come on over. So I go over and we're getting ready for, this is kind of what it looked like. The 400 2.8, the 600, and and wondering if you're going to get through it. That was 1984. That was 2006. 2016 in Rio. And I know I look pretty awful here, but I think I didn't feel as bad as I looked. And remember, that's very important. Never feel as bad as you look. But 4x5 speed graphic film camera and about 5 or 6 digital cameras. That's my speed graphic. Anyway, we're getting ready for the big final race of that day, which is the women's 3,000 meters. Mary Decker, the woman on the right in the red, the great American runner who, like all the American team, when they boycotted the Moscow Games in 1980, none of the Americans got to participate. So 1984 was her real shot at getting gold. And nobody ever held as many records as Mary Decker. Next to her, 151, Zola Budd, the barefoot farm girl from South Africa, running for the United Kingdom because they were still under apartheid blocage. South Africa was not welcome yet at the Olympic Games. So I sit down and I'm got my 400 of them as they come around here. And as they go right in front of me, I grab my 85 and I shoot them again. And then they're going to do 7 laps. So if you have to reload, just remember that they're going to be back here in 45 seconds. You better reload in a hurry. Well, about the 4th lap, maybe the 5th lap, coming along in front of me, and I'm shooting as they go by. And it's like ka-chung, 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 ka-chung. And I see something happening here that I can't really tell what it is because you only can see out of the camera when the mirror is down and you're not taking a picture. When you're shooting, the mirror is up and you're just looking at a black piece of glass. But I'm seeing this flash of red going into what seems to be the wrong place. And I realize Mary Decker has fallen. They've collided. Mary Decker has fallen. She's on the infield. Okay, now that shouldn't, ooh. Oh, shit. Okay. Oh, okay. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. I'm barely waiting, but I'm waiting. I'm kind of waiting. I'm not touching. Okay, there. So I grabbed the 400 again, and this was pre-autofocus, basically pre-everything. 35 millimeter film, Fuji Chrome 100, push 1 stop, 250th at 2.8, because of kind of late afternoon light. And I just remember telling myself, take that extra half a second and make sure you're focused on her face. And then I rattled off about 5 frames, including this one, which became kind of the picture of the '84 Olympic Games. And why did it? Well, this was the one thing that wasn't supposed to happen. And in so many ways, news is defined by things that weren't supposed to happen. So Mary never really got her medal. She tried again in 1988. It didn't go very well. But 35 years later, I'm real big on 35, I guess, I tracked her down in Oregon. I went to her house, and I finally got a picture of her in a happy place, cuddling with her little dog. And the dog is like, who the hell is this photographer anyway? And why am I being picked up? But it was like a moment that I'd waited for a very long time. And when I got there, she said, okay, just one rule. I said, oh yeah, what's that? We're not going to talk about 1984. I say, hey, I'm the last guy to bring up 1984. But I got her to pick up her dog and do a little snuggle. And for me, it was like an important picture to finally get. I mean, It's not a gold Olympic medal, but it's a close second. This was Zola Budd, the young farm girl running barefoot at the time. She's a coach down in South Carolina, a track coach. And this was all this terrible day of their lives, and they've kind of moved on from it. So that meant I was now a sports photographer, which I thought I'd been a sports photographer in high school and college. When I look back, I was a pretty bad one. But the good news is you can always get better. And I started working again. This was at the Penn Relays, a big track meet in Philadelphia. And I've now racked up 14 Olympic Games, 3 winter and 11 summer. And I don't know, sports, I don't really think of myself as any more or less of a sports photographer, but I love getting into that world of theater that surrounds big-time sports, especially the Olympics. And this woman was a kindergarten teacher in Buffalo, New York, and the rumor was there's no discipline problems in her class. So we thought. This is the picture I look at every time I think I'll have a Snickers candy bar. And I think, oh, well, maybe I don't need that Snickers after all. But, you know, there's no amount of not eating a Snickers that'll get you a tummy like that, unfortunately, without being a diver. But then the beauty of diving is something that I really love. This picture in the office, this is known as the Superman picture. But diving is great. You can go wide, you can go tight. You can look at it as a contact sheet. There are all kinds of really wonderful things that diving is another one of these gifts to photographers. Start of a race. The Barcelona Olympics, 1992, I think, and this is the Chinese winner of the 10-meter platform where she was just suspended over the city. Flojo, do you remember Flojo, Florence Griffith Joyner? She had these amazing fingernails that would get across the finish line faster than anyone else's fingernails. This was the arrival of 7-on-a-side rugby and a relay race in the swimming hall in Rio. And if you get there, I always try and get there 4 or 5 days, sometimes a week early, because you can wander around all these locations a week and 5, 6 days before that you can't actually do during the competition. They get a little more strict, but then you just see these beautiful little places where, you know, you're a photographer, go make a picture. This is Michael Phelps in the summer of 2004, before he had won any of his many, many Olympic medals. Swimmer, Natalie Coughlin. And this is divers practicing. And that's the thing that you don't ever see as much of. You know, you watch the television version, you just see them dive and it's beautiful. But seeing all the time they put in to get ready for it is really how you become one of those Olympic champions. The synchronized swimming, popping out of the water just in the right place, fortunately. The first year that women's wrestling was an Olympic event, and I had gone to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado, and I was being taken around by this press guy, and he said, well, you want to see what it looks like up on the clock tower? So we climb up, and I look down, and I see these amazing tic-tac-toe lines of shadow. And we didn't have the wrestlers there yet. It was just, we're just looking for a place. And he said, well, you know, one of them has to take their dog to the veterinarian. And I look down and I see these lines. I said, I love the dog, but he can wait. Get her here now. Because I knew that even half an hour or an hour later, we were going to lose the shadow. The sun was going to come up in a way that would totally lose this picture. And we got our picture, and they actually ran it in the Time issue. Beach volleyball. Korea beating Cuba in baseball. This is a baseball picture, the Atlanta Braves stretching. And this is part of my 4x5 speed graphic, weird big old lens from a 1943 reconnaissance camera from World War II. Some of the old gear is really useful in the modern age. This is Alexander Karelin, the Russian wrestler who won something like 27 straight matches before he finally was beaten by a kid who was a sheep rancher from Wyoming in the U.S. Now, you're not allowed to have a flash at the Olympics, but if I'd known who that person was that fired their flash, I would have bought him a drink because it makes that picture. Cycling. Waiting for the baton. This was beach volleyball in London, right behind what was Churchill's wartime headquarters in Westminster. They keep finding these great places to put up beach volleyball. This was in Greenwich, where they did dressage. Took me an hour to learn how to say that. And up there in the really bright white spot is Serena Williams winning a title. But when I got back up into the crowds and I started opening up and closing down the diaphragm of my lens, it got way more interesting to see the faces of the people who were watching the match and letting that get burned out than it was getting the tennis players exposed right and everybody here just completely black. So just trust me, Serena's in there somewhere. This was the Egyptian synchronized swimming team. And my favorite picture from the Rio Olympics. Just a little moody moment. And at the start of the 100 meters, where you would just see these incredible synchronicity of the runners, like they don't have to all be doing it the same way. They do it the same way because that's the fastest way you can run. This high jumper just realized when he looked up on the big board and saw he made the finals for high jumping. He was pretty happy. They have this sport called trampoline. It's something like trampolines in outer space or something. They're up 10, 12, 15 meters doing gymnastics and then back onto the trampoline and up again. Pretty amazing. Oh, okay, sorry, we've seen that one before. Marion Jones, again, a big camera, 4x5 portrait of her just before she was stripped of all her medals for having used drugs. This was shot with the 4x5, and it's the 100 meters in which, okay, you could say, well, why don't you have the close-up? And you'd be right in a certain aspect. But at the same time, there's something about seeing the entire tableau, the list of all the runners. You can see here who's just about going to break the line. And this is what the stadium's like. If you were standing there, that's what you'd be seeing. And sometimes for me, those are the pictures I want to try and come up with. I want to put you right where I was. So this is Usain Bolt, shot with my 4x5 speed graphic at the end of one of the relay races. And across the other side of the track is a friend of mine who was shooting all the photographers. And everybody's got their brand new Nikon, Canon, digital, except one guy with a speed graphic. And we're still trying to track that guy down. Usain Bolt, for once not chased by TV cameras in the last time he raced. And then looking for these little moments, like athletes, especially Olympic athletes, for reasons I don't really understand, they always do this jumping thing right before they get set to race. And it turns out it isn't just the runners, it's kind of everybody. Swimmers, the synchronized swimming teams, judo, another 100-meter runner. I don't know, it's just one of those things you start to see if you hang around long enough near a starting line. Even shot putters jump. And this is, I don't know any baseball fans here, this is Cal Ripken, the day that he broke the record for the most number of consecutive games played by a baseball player. 2,131 games. He never missed a game for like 9 years. Ski jumping is awesome. People fearless. And, you know, they'll jump the length of a soccer field in the air. And they run along, and they'll run, and jump and get held up by their coach. And it's amazing because balancing is their world. Everything they do is about balance because when they're going into the wind, they have to have the angle of their bodies and their skis just right. So you see them flying down the hill. That's really what it looks like from the top. So you got to be a pretty gutsy person just to take that run. And that's what it looks like. I mean, the people are down there hundreds of meters away. And this guy, you know, if you tipped his feet up and he went over the other edge, which I don't advise doing, it would be like 20 or 30 meters down. But when they see a rail like that, these guys can't stop doing a little balancing thing. And you do that, jump into your coach's hands, and then at the end of the day, they'll go put you back in the closet, and they'll come and get you the next morning, and you do the whole thing all over again. Speed skating, figure skating, practice. Luge, still, in my book, the funkiest of all these sports. And when they get ready to go, there is this, I'm going to meet my maker kind of moment, the way they're looking and hoping and wishing and trying to just hope they get down the hill in one piece. The concentration is really intense. Bobsled. Frankly, I'm not crazy about winter sports, and I don't know if I'm going to even go to Milan next year. I kind of wouldn't mind it just so I could find a couple of fun things to do like this. But mostly you're really cold during the Winter Olympics, unless you're doing hockey or skating. I'm not that crazy about cold, but it's fun to see. Now, this is a great story. This was the end of a 50-kilometer cross-country race. Like, when was the last time any of you walked or biked 30 miles, 50 kilometers? It's been a long time. I barely even did that coming down from Riga. And this is the young Finnish guy who comes across the finish line first. And he's kind of hooping it up a little bit. And the Russian skier was right behind him and completely shattered that he was unable to make it up at the last minute and have a heroic victory. And this is what happened. They come over, you know, you go 50 kilometers. This is the next obvious thing to do. And they would just collapse over the line. And the the winner goes to the silver medalist and tries to console him and just, nice race. And this guy just wasn't having any of it. He's probably still bummed out over it, frankly. He stayed there a very long time. And this guy was super happy. I wish I had cranked my zoom lens back just a little, that I would have even had his face in the picture, but you can't have everything. And immediately thereafter, as the first few winners came across, the word spread, hey, there's going to be the medal ceremony around the backside, let's go. So all the skiers who had finished and every photographer wandered around the backside, and I just stayed there, mesmerized by these fallen bodies that kept coming, landing over the finish line and then collapsing. And then it started to get a little misty and snowy, and they had these big lights up, and it was just this beautiful scene. And this guy was the last one to come across, and he just collapsed in this. What I only could imagine was, oh my God, I'm such a failure. I'm the worst cross-country skier in the whole world. Well, he's probably about the 20th best in the whole world. But at the moment when you're finished last, that's not something you'll ever think about. And the amazing thing was that over 50 kilometers, he was only, I checked my files, he was only 19 minutes after the winner. And meanwhile, everybody else has gone around to do the medals, and I stayed and did this picture, and I think I won that one. Well, having been around sports for a long time, I got an arts grant proposal about 7 years ago, and I'm thinking, well, what can I do? Well, people are talking about all these old athletes, all these older people who are still very active. So I said, okay, let's do older athletes, or as my wife calls them. So she has, my wife and I are 78 years old. So a few years ago, she's with some of her college friends, and they decided to call themselves the fourth quarter queens. Because, let's face it, when you're our age, you're in the fourth quarter of the game. And even if you make it to 100, that's great. But not everybody does. So we decided to call this story the fourth quarter athletes, because everybody here is at least 50, but most are over 70, and a lot over 80 and 90 and a few hundreds. So these guys are 70-odd-year-old surfers out in California. I thought nothing tells the story that I'm trying to describe to you like these three guys. And there are, as it turns out, unless you know about it, you're probably not aware of how many competitions there are. I just was out in Iowa in the central U.S. 3 weeks ago at the Senior Olympics with 30,000 athletes. Again, most of them in their 70s and 80s. And this guy is an 82-year-old swimmer. You talk to these guys in San Francisco, and everybody's heard of Alcatraz, right? The famous prison that's on an island in San Francisco Bay. And it's like 5 kilometers out in the bay. And hey, you ever been to Alcatraz? And the guy says, yeah, about 100 times. This is what they do just for grins. They'll go swim 10 kilometers out and back just to go visit Alcatraz, just to chalk up one more time that they've done it. And it's amazing to me because, frankly, these are my people, how dedicated these athletes are at this age. This guy is in his 60s and he's a champion, world champion water skier who basically never puts on a water ski, just uses his feet. And this was from the recent games. These are the 80-year-old women's basketball. And this is really the most fun because every one of them is a grandma or ought to be a grandma. And they are on each other like like it's a professional football game. Then there was a powerlifting event I went to. And some of these faces were a little frightening. But all of it I find incredibly inspiring. They just don't accept defeat. This guy's a little scary, but okay. And this was a whole bunch of the weightlifters afterwards. You got to be nice to these people because they could still tear you apart if they really had to. This was a 90-year-old swimmer. And this was another older swimmer who didn't carry around a clipboard or anything, but they wrote their events and what heat and what lane. And it was, the 200 individual medley and the 50 freestyle. And if you don't write it on your arm, you just don't know when you're supposed to swim. But there's a level of intensity and commitment from these older athletes that I've been very inspired by, even though I'm not actually an athlete myself. Pickleball, softball, pole vaulting, javelin, women. This was triathlon, swimming, running, biking. The hammer throw. Thing is, you don't really want to be around without a lot of safety net when these 80-year-old guys are throwing the hammer, because it can get dangerous. This was volleyball, a boxing gym in Brooklyn, New York. And this guy worked out for like an hour, and he's got sweat dripping everywhere, and he's punching the bag and punching the bag. And I finally asked him, I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Oh, I'm the minister from the church around the corner." So nobody steals his charity bowl. And a skateboarder. It gets to, you can see it gets to be more than just a basketball game. And one of my favorites, the Chiefs jersey. That guy had just turned 90, and the guy right in front here was 89. And the 89-year-old, these guys play ice hockey twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 to 1. And they take their shift, and the 89 said to me, "Well, I asked Marsh to come," the 90-year-old. He said, "I didn't want to be the oldest guy here." I love these guys. And of course, the background, the teenagers in the background, they're all in their 60s. How are we doing on time? Good? Okay. Okay. All right. To be continued. All right. I started taking pictures of presidents when I was in high school, my last year of high school. 2 months before he was shot in Dallas, John F. Kennedy came to Salt Lake City. And okay, this picture is actually in focus, but during his speech, he came to, I said to my mom, "Why don't we go see the president?" And you could still kind of do that in those days. This is him coming into the Mormon tabernacle. And this was when it was so hard, I could barely get my camera up to focus, and I just put it on infinity, because it was like, back where you guys are. I thought, that's kind of infinity. And I shot. And everything, of course, was completely out of focus, because here's a secret. 20 meters is not infinity. Remember that one. So he walked by at one point, and I made this shot. And I got home and that night, and I developed my film. And I was like, "Oh, man, this sucks." And I just snipped it into strips of 5 and put it in a little envelope. And it sat in a cardboard box for 35 years. 35 years. And 35 years later, I was asked to do a show about American presidents. So we pulled the pictures out, made a print, and now I'm looking at it with a little old, now I'm in my 50s instead of being 17. And I'm thinking, you know, it isn't so much blurry as it is just showing the dynamic young president. And it isn't really underexposed. It's just, I was trying to get a certain look of this dynamic president racing along. So like if you wait long enough with stuff that you hate now, like put it away in a safe place, because you never know what you're going to think about it in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So this is President Lyndon Johnson in Washington. This is the one we sort of jokingly refer to as the picture of the response to the newspaper advertisement for 50-year-old white guys with glasses to show up. And they all showed up. Lyndon Johnson's wife, Lady Bird. There's Lyndon in the Oval Office. George Romney, whose son, he ran for president. And this was my first picture ever published in a big magazine, in Newsweek. And, you know, had my little 35 millimeter lens and got in, made a couple of frames, printed it in the furnace room of the house, sent them to Newsweek, and the next week it actually ran in the magazine with my name on it, and they sent me $50. I was hooked. And his son, Mitt Romney, ran unsuccessfully against Barack Obama in 2012. And it's kind of a small world. This is Bobby Kennedy coming also to Utah. And it's kind of hard to see it, but these were, I could get close, I could get far away. I went up in the stands and did a shot showing him with the big crowd. Very hard to do that kind of moving around now. It just, the security is much tighter on all these events. Richard Nixon, some of you might recall that name. With Leonid Brezhnev, some of you might recall that name. And a roll of film of Nixon saying he's not a crook. This was at the Watergate hearings, including Bob Haldeman, who was his chief of staff. This is like a big American thing that played out in the summer of 1973 and 1974, when they thought that Nixon had really overstepped his bounds. And of course, now and in Washington, nothing like this will happen because the Democrats are too afraid of doing anything to Trump. Too bad. Oh, and John Lennon and Yoko Ono came to the hearings one day. And eventually, Nixon resigned. He had people that liked him. These were his Secretary of State and Chief of Staff, huddled out in front of the White House. Nixon going across to his office next to the White House. This was the state of the art that a television producer was wearing at the time. Do you remember when we all had the first cell phones that were like as big as a loaf of bread? That's just before that. And this is Nixon when he resigned the presidency. And he ran against George McGovern. And this is a painting by Bartolomeo van der Hilst of the militia of Amsterdam in 1648 after the signing of a treaty. And I thought nothing has ever been a better example of what, if I got to be president, this is what my cabinet photo would be like, with Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, all the assistants, and you can tell looking at it which one is supposed to be the president and which one is supposed to be the Secretary of State, but it probably won't happen. This is Jerry Ford and Betty Ford, and Ford campaigning with Ford's and the Giscard d'Estaing, the White House. Ford with his dogs, me with the president. His photographer was a really good friend of mine. And that's Giscard d'Estaing, whose campaign I photographed in 1974 when I was working with Gamma. And I'm not really sure that the president took any of the advice I was giving him, other than my drink could use another ice cube. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, in Moscow. This is a scene that we thought we would never see. Ronald Reagan speaking at Lenin University in Moscow and after his meeting with Gorbachev in Geneva. And this was a picture shot at the end of what was considered a pretty upbeat meeting, their first meeting. But the picture seemed to divide the room in two, and nobody would use the picture because it was too negative. And then at the end of the year, Life magazine, not Time magazine, who I kind of shot it for, but Life magazine said, yeah, we'll use it. And they ran it a full double page and didn't really, they were not quite as concerned about the connotation. This was Reagan's last visit to Gorbachev. And on one side, on the far side, they had the Soviet press. And on my side, they had the White House press. And we walked in there, and they're all sitting down at the table. And I'm the guy who said, how about a handshake? And Reagan was kind of, well, okay. And Gorbachev was like, okay. And they stand up, shake hands, bing, 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 made my picture. And a couple of years ago, I went looking on the Getty website, and I typed in Reagan, Gorbachev, Moscow, 1988. And I see that one of the Soviet photographers, first of all, shot with a flash, which frankly I think kind of ruins the picture. But it includes me, the guy in the beige coat up at the second row. That's me taking my picture without a flash from the other side. You just never know where you're going to turn up. George and Barbara Bush. Bush with his Vice President Dan Quayle. Bill Clinton and Al Gore getting their hair worked on before a TV interview. And the war room where they directed the Bill Clinton campaign. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was named to the U.S. Supreme Court and was kind of this beloved figure. Breaking news. Breaking news, a huge scandal that Bill Clinton had been making out with this young intern, female intern, in the Oval Office. The first few days, everybody thought Clinton was going to have to resign in shame. But being Bill Clinton, of course, he managed to get through it. But it created this whole other narrative about this young woman named Monica Lewinsky, the name that some of you might have heard of, and her romancing the president. And I got a call when Monica was running around the city, but nobody had talked to her. She wasn't seeing anybody. She'd get out of her SUV and go into a building and come out, but always staked out by the photographers, and there were just all these ugly pictures of her getting out of her car. And I got a phone call on a Monday from the Time magazine editor, and she said, what are you doing this Friday? And this was clearly the biggest story in Washington. I said, is this about what I think it's about? And she said, pretty sure it is. Pretty sure it is. I said, well, in that case, I'm available. So it was going to be the first interview that she was going to give was going to be with Time magazine, and a lot of negotiating going on. So she calls me back Wednesday and says, it's been pushed from Friday back to Saturday. So we get in, we go to the Morton Steakhouse in a back room. The lighting is about like this. It's really bad. but I was shooting Fuji 800 color negative film. And they said, you know, tell your photographer to bring one camera and no flash. But operating on the Burnett principle, which is always add one, I took 2 cameras and 1 flash. Worked out pretty good. And as we sit down, her lawyer says, ground rules are she can't talk about the president, she can only talk about herself. And my reporter said, yeah, that's fine, we don't care. And I said, hey, can I take a couple of snaps? Yeah, go ahead. So this was the first picture. It was like kind of like a beauty shot of Monica, followed by sipping a Cosmo martini. And this was really my favorite picture. And the film went up to Time magazine. They ran just like a headshot. And then a week later, they ran another headshot. And I kept telling the editor, there's a really cool shot of her sipping a martini glass. You should print it up and put it in the mix. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're going to run that one. Okay, but you really should. Yeah, not going to happen. So after they don't use that, and they give me back all the film, and I take it back to my own office, and I said, there's this pretty cool picture of her sipping a martini glass. And my editor, who I've worked with for years, and my agency says, you know, got her hair in the way. You can't even see who it is. I said, here's this amazing thing that they invented. It's called type. And if you ran this picture half a page in Time magazine, and somewhere on that page were the words Monica Lewinsky, even the Time magazine readers would put 2 and 2 together. And my guy was like, yeah, I don't think so. I said, print that picture or I'm going to kill you. So he made a big 11 by 14 print, and we couldn't give it away for a while. And then it was like October, and Life magazine was doing their year-end issue. So we take the print over, like ding, 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 double page right at the beginning. And like the first or second spread in the magazine was the, there we go, that one. And I get a call from one of the other Time magazine editors saying, so you're holding back on us, huh? So what are you talking about? Oh, the picture of Monica with the martini glass? Oh, so are you talking about the one that I told Rick at least 10 times that he should make a print of and take it and show it to the editor? Is that the picture you're asking me about? Yeah, have a nice day. Goodbye. So sometimes you kind of get to tell the editors to stuff it because you're right. Not always, but it's nice when it happens. This was during the Bill Clinton, when they were talking about impeaching Bill Clinton. And I'm sorry I don't have the video of this, but this is the lawyer who was in charge of the prosecution. And we had to get down and kind of crawl around on our hands and knees with our cameras going back and forth. If he wanted to get on that side and shoot his left side, and then bump, 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 crawl back here. So at one point, I'm crawling from over there in front of the table to over here, and all of a sudden, one of the other photographers just puts his hand on my shoulder. And I like, and they're still talking over our heads. I said, what's the problem? He said, you hooked his microphone wire with your monopod by accident. And as you're moving, every time you move, his microphone is being pulled away. I said, okay, I'll get away from that wire. I mean, you can't really make up the good stuff that happens. The good stuff just happens. This is a Holga. Anybody have a Holga? Little $25 Chinese plastic camera, sharp in the center, not very much on the edges, kind of goofy looking. On the right circumstance, the right light, it's beautiful. That was the 2000 campaign. The George W. Bush inaugural parade. George W. Bush's feet at the Central Intelligence Agency. Me with my big speed graphic trying to figure out where to look next. And what I decided after we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, all this stuff after 9/11, 25 years ago, I'm too young to go to Iraq. It's not going to happen. But I'll try and do something in Washington that's a little different. I was still living in Washington, D.C. So that's when I first took out my 4x5 and made a couple of pictures of these hearings. And I thought, wow, that's a different thing than just shooting it with a 200 on a digital camera. So I started shooting more and more. And every time I do something with the 4x5 camera, I approached Newsweek or Time magazine with it, and they always would buy the picture. So I thought, that's a pretty cool thing. This is George Bush speaking on a piece of Polaroid film, 4x5. And I kind of got into this thing that I had briefly, when I was 16, I had seen a speed graphic, never really learned how to use it. And now I'm shooting 4x5 like it's the deal and loving it. It slows you down. You can't just shoot 20 frames like you can on your digital or even your motorized film camera. You're going to shoot one frame, and you have to think about what that one frame is going to be. This was, I thought we had an international incident here when Bush grabbed the Chinese premier to keep him from walking off the thing, but nobody ever made a big deal out of it. This is a bunch of reporters covering Capitol Hill, all looking at their cell phones. You almost can't even find a notebook in there. So that's me, what I called dancing with speeds, because my speed graphic on this tripod, this happened twice. You can't even imagine. Like I shoot something and then I reach down for my Canon digital camera to shoot a few things. And another photographer is in that, oh, I have to move and go get a shot from the other side. And people just get up and start running. And twice they ran over my camera, knocked the tripod down. The camera fell off the tripod, the lens fell off the camera. So I started wrapping my arm around the camera just so that it wouldn't happen again. And that became known as dancing with speeds. It's like speed graphic. And after the 2004 Athens Olympics, and my pictures with that camera won World Press Photo, sorry about that. World Press Photo Sports Series. A crazy Dutch photographer said, I need to know what you're shooting that stuff with. And I told him all about this. And he said, okay, I want to do a website about it. 4x5 camera, the Aero Ektar lens, this 1940s vintage, very fast 4x5 lens. We'll call it the Burnett Combo. So I said, okay, if you really want to do it, that's fine. Dozens and then hundreds of people. I had no idea there was that much 4x5 interest out there. And he said it got to be too big of a deal to have his own website handling it, and we moved it over to Facebook. And you're all welcome to come and look at the Dancing with Speeds page on Facebook. And we have like 1,200 people who were into this 4x5 with a fast 75-year-old lens on it. I mean, you just can't predict where the world is going. Anyway, that's my funky old camera with my little tripod, and I'd set it up, and you'd have to focus it. It slows you down, but therein lies the charm, because you're now forced to look at things in a very different way. Focus. Take the film out of your mouth, put the film in the camera, and you're waiting for 2004, John Kerry running for president. You're waiting for him to come out of the airplane. And just when he gets down there, bing, you hit the cable release. And I was clearly, at this point, I was still the only person shooting 4x5 on the campaign. And I get up there along with my friend Dave Kennerly, who I was shooting for Time. He was with Newsweek. So we're best friends, but super competitive with each other. And I'm setting up my camera, having this whole mental discussion with myself about, is there too much light on his shirt? And if I close the shade on the window, but if I do that, it's going to take too much light away from his face. So, and all I can hear is the noise of Kennerly's digital camera, just like bing, 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 bing. And I finally just get my camera up here, and he looks at me like, are you ever going to take a picture? And I shoot this thing, and the next week it's the cover of Time magazine. So you never know, but I say go with your gut instinct. And then just when you think you have a picture, a sound man will put his microphone right in the middle of your shot. But it's a look. The 4x5 thing is a whole look that you don't get with 35 millimeter. This is another Kerry route. I know you don't really care about John Kerry, but he's just the subject of my pictures. No more than that. This is Kerry with digital 70 to 200 zoom lens, and the same exact moment. And the way I could do the focus by seeing that his foot was on the O, then I would know he was in focus. And this is shooting it with my 4x5. And they actually ran this picture. I love that fact that they did that, because to me that's a way more interesting treatment of that picture. And Dick Gephardt, these are a bunch of people. This is kind of the way it used to look to cover a campaign back in the Jimmy Carter era. Everybody had one Leica and a couple of Nikons or a couple of Canons before it all changed. And this is what the reporters were putting their laptops. And then it just became phones. Everybody's got their phone and they're very aggressive with their phones. It's quite unpleasant, really. And so I would keep a regular camera just because occasionally when there was a levitating water bottle, you need to be able to just shoot something fast. And, you know, this is, he's a pretty good athlete, but he looks like a klutz. And then I finally got the right picture, and that's what I went with. And then, you know, he's scaring small children, and that's always worth a picture. You get somebody who can scare small children regularly, you're going to get published. A morning ride in Iowa on the campaign, Hillary Clinton. And we were at this Mexican restaurant, and we knew that the door was just over by where that Asian is behind her. And it's like, she's going to walk by the cashier sign. I'm pretty sure we just need to be a little bit patient here. She's going to do it. And she did it. Another great picture that never got used. This is her with a 4x5. And I know really it shouldn't be about the equipment, but sometimes you get so invested in trying to find a look or a feeling or something that's a little different. John McCain, this is climbing in the air in a hangar. I went up with my camera, shooting pictures of McCain from up on top of the ladder there, and you know, he liked chocolate. Even cardboard cutouts, you know, the thing about a cardboard cutout is they pretty much do exactly what you ask them to. And yes, you can get really tired doing this. Another 4x5 adventure with Obama near the end of his first campaign in 2008. That's where everybody was to stand and his family for the inauguration. Ronald Reagan's death and lying in state in the Capitol. His last press conference on his last day before Trump took over. This is Trump speaking about American carnage. We're still trying to figure out what that means. And this was one of the doors of the Capitol after the January 6th riots. The Supreme Court off in the distance. And soldiers who had come in to protect the Capitol, looking at all the paintings on the ceiling of the dome. Joe Biden being sworn in with Lady Gaga. The Supreme Court. I mean, we were still wearing masks in 2021. So this is one of the young women who was being at the January 6th hearings about who did stuff bad. And as I was shooting this, a friend of mine shot me shooting her. So now I'm just going to get into some favorite pictures. They're one-ofs mostly. Diana Spencer at her wedding. The Floyd Bennett balloon race in Place de la Concorde in Paris. Amazing scene. Concorde was totally shut off for the balloons. And the first balloon went up, and then they all went. A story on D-Day veterans, and this guy had been in charge of graves registration at Omaha Beach. I said, what did that mean? What was your job? He said, I looked after the dead guys. The 50th anniversary of D-Day. I went up for the 30th anniversary in 1974, happened to be in Paris, and with a couple of friends, went up to the D-Day beaches and have been back every 5 or 10 years for the last, I guess, 40 years. And this guy was a 73 or 74-year-old veteran paratrooper. And in 1994, on the 50th anniversary, all these 70-year-old veterans said, well, what the heck, why don't we jump again? And the government, of course, was thinking all the headlines in the papers will be, D-Day veterans killed in parachute jump. Said that's a really bad headline. So you guys have to do, I think it was 6 or 7 qualifying jumps, and they're now all in their 70s. Just to prove to us that you can do this without getting hurt. And so a whole bunch of them went through the training, and they jumped again 50 years later. And this is active duty troops from Germany filling the sky with chutes as he walks off the drop zone near Sainte-Mère-Église. When the U.S. invaded Grenada to ostensibly look after medical students at the medical university. It was hot and steamy hot. And about the 3rd or 4th day, I was just walking up a hill, and I see in this house all these 82nd Airborne paratroopers. And I did the one thing that you're not really supposed to do with active duty troops carrying guns, which is, don't anybody move, and grab my 50. And when they turned around, before they were going to decide what to do with me, made my photograph. And they realized I was just, the construct, the composition was so perfect, I just didn't want somebody to blow it by waving to mom, you know? That happens. This is a soldier on the deck of the USS Eisenhower on the way to Haiti, 1994. A guy somewhere on a beach in Santa Barbara, California. I'm still today not quite sure what's going on here. But the great thing about being a photographer is, yeah, it would have been better if I could have gotten his name. But I was really just doing a story about the funky quality of Santa Barbara. So it sort of fit right in. Fishermen on little truck tire inner tubes in Havana Harbor. Beijing Airport. Oop. Uh-oh. Okay. I give up. The fact that these things work at all always amazes me. It's pretty Pretty fancy technology. Okay, yeah, this is on an airport bus. I saw this kid who had been zippered to a pole so he wouldn't get removed from his family. And, you know, what can you say? It's like he's probably still stuck on that bus. This is Ayers Rock in Australia, and the very first day in the life of book project that my buddy Rick Smolin put together was Australia. And everybody got an assignment, and my assignment was Ayers Rock, or Uluru as it's known. And we're trying to figure out, how do you show the scale of something as huge as this giant rock? So, well, if we get a Cessna to fly back and forth between you and the rock, so that's what we did. And I was up in a helicopter, and it kind of gives you at least an idea of what it looked like. And we had to do it in the afternoon when the afternoon sun would make it kind of light up so red. Bob Marley, probably everybody here knows who that is, right? And the answer to your question is, yes, of course I did. Well, how could you not? I mean, if Bob Marley hands you a spliff the size of an 85 millimeter lens, yeah, come on. Maybe even a 105. Baseball player who recently was finally voted into the Hall of Fame, the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I was doing pictures. This is what I love about shooting with the 4x5 camera. It forces you to try and figure out something that's not quite so evident. And I had this camera up, and I was trying to shoot some batters. And this guy comes up to me, and with a very profound Spanish accent says, you know, "Hey man, what's going on, man? What you got, man?" I said, "Hey, old photographer, old camera." And he kind of laughed. I said, "Hey, grab a bat and let me shoot your picture." So I made this frame, and he laughed, went into the locker room, and I found one of the press attachés. I said, who did I just photograph? Because I had no idea who he was. And he was this all-star outfielder for the Minnesota Twins, and who finally was, just a year ago, was voted in to the Hall of Fame. And I said, when he gets voted in, my picture is ready. This was a farmer during the farm crisis in the 1980s who had lost his farm because interest rates had gotten so high. He'd borrowed a lot of money, couldn't pay it back, had to sell the farm. And on the last day he was in his house that he'd lived in for 40 years, he's just sitting on the empty bed, and all you can do is pour your heart out. Warsaw, the night of martial law in 1981, December 1981, when under pressure from Moscow, the Polish military declared martial law, arrested Lech Wałęsa, closed down Solidarność. I'm sure a lot of you remember that, but 40-odd years ago. This was in Quetta, Baluchistan, and I got an assignment, one more of those great assignments, to go to a place you've never heard of. And that was part of the magic of being a magazine guy that occasionally would get a phone call. I got a call from the editor. He said, so, hey kid, what are you doing next couple of weeks? Well, there was only one answer for that, because you needed to find out if what he was going to possibly propose was better than what you might already have. So you just usually say, oh, not much. What's going on? Well, we've got this story we're doing in Pakistan, and if you haven't got anything going on, I said, well, that sounds like way more interesting than anything I've got. So I go into his office. This is a guy who always kept the door open to his office. He was always people coming in and out. He closes the door to his office, and I think this is a big deal. So what's happening? So, well, one of the foreign policy writers read a thing about what's going on in Baluchistan, and we need to cover it. You want to go? I said, yeah. Where is it? And he said, I have no idea. But if you're on, let's go find out. So we open the door and we walk out in the hallway. There's a big National Geographic map. And we're kind of like, oh, let's see. Oh, it's part of Pakistan. It's the western part of Pakistan by Afghanistan and Iran. Okay, let's do it. So then I went home and I finally read this article about, and now even 40 years later, there's still talk of Baluch rebels trying to leave the central government of Pakistan. It's kind of never going to get over, I think. But my first day, I walked around. People are pretty friendly. And I walked into this, in the afternoon, to this beautiful little tea shop. And this is what you wait for your whole life as a photographer. Like that kind of light in a room where half the people are smoking cigarettes and the tea is steaming hot. So you have all these vapors and the light is coming in and creating this shaft of light and just lighting this guy up a little bit. And, I don't think I can count the number of conversations I've had in my life with my eyebrows. Everybody from this guy to Mikhail Gorbachev. During an interview we had with Gorbachev, and he has to wait for the interpreter, so half the time he's got twiddling his thumbs, he's got nothing to do. And he kind of hears my camera shutter go off and looks up at me, and I just kind of, and he kind of does a, so we just had the best conversation, and no one had to say a word. And all these sort of big deal Time magazine foreign correspondents, like they're, ask the first secretary. They're being very serious. And he and I are just doing Groucho Marx back and forth to each other. So this guy, I see this light coming in, and I kind of give him the old, hey, do you mind if I sit here and get a great cup of tea like that? And he just kind of nodded, and I sit down. And this is the day that I discovered the secret of drinking hot tea by watching this gentleman. You take your really hot cup of tea and your saucer, and you just turn it a little bit to drip it over the side of the cup into the saucer, increasing greatly the surface area of the hot tea and immediately making it slurpable off the saucer. Then pour a little more out of the cup. And that's what he was doing. I thought, man, it doesn't get better than this. Good picture, good light, and a really good cup of tea. I love being a photographer. This was 20 years ago this week. The Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans. And it was September of 2005. And 20 years. And not until January of 2006 did I get a call from National Geographic. We think we'd like you to go to down in New Orleans, and we're doing a big thing on the increasing firepower of hurricanes, and we want to do a thing on all the Gulf Coast and all the destruction from Katrina. And of course, in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, it's all going to be, there'll be nothing left to photograph 4 months later. Well, I had no idea that so little had changed since September. Cars thrown around, houses smashed. And this is 3 4x5 frames shot, kind of pushed together. This was a floating casino which had floated like a kilometer down the shore, and then the water had carried it up onto ground, and there was no way they could refloat it, so they had to tear it down in place. It was a real mess. Again, it's like 5 pictures. These are digital pictures here, I think. And sometimes you just do these little ping, 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 and make a, with Photoshop, and you can make your panorama that way. This had been in Alabama, Dauphin Island, Alabama. One beautiful, gorgeous seaside house up on stilts, because the water would come in, after another, and every one of the houses was just blown away into smithereens, leaving nothing but the pilings that they had been built on. And I was amazed when I got there how little had been cleaned up, that there was still plenty to do. And I went to this house where I saw this guy had taken some of his little boy's clothes and just hung them up there. And later, I never met the guy, but they managed, once they decided to use the picture, they managed to find who he was, and the magazine did an interview with him, and he said, you know, at the end of it all, his house was completely destroyed. He said, I just wanted to put those up as a sign to people that life doesn't always turn out the way you think it might. This Ford Mustang in a neighborhood that was just convulsed with like a meter and a half of sand, just completely covered. And I'm shooting all of this, both with my then 5D Canons, but really shooting it with the 4x5 camera, and being forced, every time I'm taking a picture, I've got to look at it for like a minute to see, is it here or do I need to be over there? Now maybe it's better back here. Yeah, that's it. Actually, that's a little better. And do I focus on the headlight or on the window? Where do I focus? All these extra decisions which have been chewed up and evaporated with digital photography, because you can kind of stop down and everything's in focus, or you can shoot it wide open and then you still have to make that choice. But especially with a 4x5 camera, you're obliged to make conscious decisions about how you're going to shoot, and which is something I really come to appreciate way more now that I've been doing it a little bit. This was a church that was covered with mud, and now 4 and 5 months later, the 5 or 6 centimeters worth of mud is finally dried out and cracking. The thing is, you didn't have to set anything up. There were these moments that were completely as if you had just taken the watch of time and just stopped it and let time carry on without anyone touching anything. To me, that was really what the pictures were all about. This was a family in a FEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, a family that had, with a boy and a daughter who had taken refuge in a mobile home while their house had been destroyed in another hurricane, and they're just trying to figure out what to do with their life. This is the girl with her girlfriend that she made living in this camp of American refugees being refugees at home. That's her brother. Oops. And this was in one of the cemeteries where even the tombs of people were set floating and ended up perched on another tombstone. These guys were at an automobile reclamation place where the only thing they could get out of the cars that had been in salt water was the catalytic converter attached to the exhaust. And they were pretty good at taking them off there, but that's what they could do, and there wasn't much else to do about it. The cars were totally ruined. And this was another refugee family that was living in a motel, a little motel room with 2 beds, and their 12-year-old kid who had been good in school, and then all of a sudden now he's living through all the pain of what being a displaced person was all about. And this is the house of where the boy's clothing was hanging. I walked in the kitchen and it was like they left 5 minutes ago, except it was 4 months ago. And glassware still in the kitchen sink. And these two women had worked in the Holiday Inn over in Mississippi and just hugged each other all night when the storm was raging and remained very good friends after it. This is the house of the next picture. You'll see the guy whose house it is. An older African American who had decided that he was not going to be kept out of his house. And he was the first one to move back in his neighborhood in the lower 9th Ward. And it looks like the stuff kind of survived okay. And he had all these great suits. It's New Orleans, you know. They dress up. He had hats, suits, and everything that you would touch because of all the salt water there for days. You pick up a hat and it would just dissolve into dust in your fingertips. So he had to totally start over. But he was a very strong-willed guy and a wonderful, you know, I tried to help. We had a show of pictures, and I showed this pictures one night in New Orleans at the museum a couple of months after I shot this picture, and he was still trying to get electricity back to his house because his wife wasn't going to move back. She'd gone up to Michigan. She wasn't going to move back until there was electricity. And I said to this big room of people, can anybody here help Herb Gettridge get electricity back to his house? And within a few weeks, they managed to do that. But he just passed away a couple of years ago, but tough guy. And this was New Orleans from down the way, and all that was left from one of those beautiful houses. I got a few pictures here from the Cambodian refugees in Thailand in 1979 who tried to escape the killing fields of Cambodia after the Khmer Rouge took over in 1975. And I went back just at the time when the first people were getting out of Cambodia, and this beautiful little boy, you know, there's nothing you can say when you see someone like this little kid who has been through things that no adult and certainly no child should ever have to go through. A mama with her baby. In 1974, I had gone to West Africa in hopes of being there when an American balloonist was trying to be the first person to cross the Atlantic in a balloon. And he was seen once over the Atlantic Ocean and then never seen again, and presumably lost at sea. But I made my way to Dakar, Senegal, and then spent a month traveling along Senegal, Upper Volta, Burkina Faso now, Mali and Niger, to do a story on the drought that was plaguing the Sahel. And these two little kids were looking out for each other out in the middle of nowhere. In Ethiopia in 1984, the terrible famine that killed a lot of people and brought so many people just walking hundreds of miles to get to a relief camp or a refugee camp. And I got out of the car in this camp and I looked around. It was like I just felt for the first and maybe the only time in my life that I'd just been dropped back in a scene out of the Bible. It just felt so otherworldly. And the smell of all the cook fires was the most intense sense there was. And this kid was hanging around the water station. And at one point, just, he wasn't okay. He probably was thirsty, but he really was just, this became this kind of symbolic moment of what happens in a drought when the water goes away. And a reminder that even in a terrible refugee camp, there's the love of a mother for her child is never going away. This was a couple of feluccas on the Nile, just about 10 miles, 15 kilometers up the river from downtown Cairo. When I happened to spend a few weeks there in 1978, when President Sadat went to Jerusalem, and Prime Minister Begin came to Ismailia, and it was the first rapprochement with any of the Arab countries in Israel. And I got up really early one morning. I tried to do that this morning, and I didn't make it. I always like to, especially a new place, get up early, go out, take a walk, 6:30, 7 o'clock, bring a camera. And this was a Kodachrome moment of pure beauty as these two boats just silently glided along in front of me. And when I was working for Gamma, the French agency in 1974, 74, I think, this was the last departure of the SS France, one of the great luxury transatlantic ships. And later it would be sold to the Norwegians, and it operated as the Norway for a while. But behind the ship, you see the brand new, newly opened, just a few months before, World Trade Center, the mighty towers that came down on September 11th. But for the moment, it was just about New York and the SS France, and that's the way it looked from a helicopter. And well, I don't know if that white poodle is still here. Is that dog still here? That giant white poodle? I almost was going to reach out and get an autograph for my dog. This is little Tyrone. One of the things that you end up doing as a photographer is like, hey, I got a new lens. Well, what are you going to do with it? Well, I guess I'll have to test it on family members since they hate it when I ask them to do that. It's like my wife, 20 years ago was the last time I ever tested a lens on my wife. And my daughter is a young actress, so she's being a little bit more playing along with it. But sooner or later, you kind of wear out the family. So where do you go? Little Tyrone, my Bichon poodle. And this was shot with one of those old Kodak cinema lenses on a small, as this one, this is a 6600, but on the 6500 Sony with the little chip, the APS-C chip. Great cameras, these little cameras. Take them everywhere. And this was this lens that is like the king of swirl. So you kind of try and get those eyes sharp, and then everything else is going to just do what it's going to do. And Tyrone is like, yes, there will be treats. So he's pretty good. And he's kind of become the one I reach to when I got to test this lens out. Got to put a roll of film in the Mamiya or a sheet of film in the Graflex and see if the mirror is still adjusted correctly or if I have to have it fixed. And the easiest way to do it is to shoot a picture and look at the picture. So his name is Little Tyrone. He's got his own Instagram, which is They Call Me Little Tyrone. But honestly, he's so much easier to work with than people, even people I love. So he just kind of gives me a couple of frames, and wherever we go, he comes with, I'll make a couple of frames of him. He's probably secretly taking a couple of me. He's a real sport about it. Okay, Dad, let's go. I'm getting tired of this. But it's nice to always have somebody that you can take a picture of. And with Instagram, I got a place to put it. It's upstate New York. But he knows when I'm going on a trip. And he tries to get himself taken along. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is my wife, and that little girl's next birthday, she's going to be 40. So here's my only 2 bits of advice. I don't really give a lot of advice. My advice about being a photographer for 50-odd years is this. Photograph your own life. Don't just wait to get that story to Baluchistan. That's great. If that happens, that's terrific. Somebody wants to send you to the Red Sea to photograph a resort, take it and go and do the best work you can do. But meanwhile, in between all that other stuff, don't just put your cameras down. Photograph the people and places and the kids and the grown-ups and the ones who probably aren't going to be around forever. The ones in your life, your friends, the people who make you who you are, those are pictures. I mean, take it from somebody who's been through a lot of stuff and has the years to prove it. Those are the pictures that eventually will come to mean as much to you as learning how to sip a cup of tea in Baluchistan. And it's sometimes, you get people complaining or, and what I like to say is, if you haven't from somebody in your family, if you haven't heard the phrase, well, can't we once just go somewhere, ... and not have to stop and take a goddamn picture? Can't we just go somewhere? If you haven't heard that like once or twice a month, you're not doing your you're not doing your job. Stay on it, because even though there are little stumbles to deal with, these are definitely the pictures that in the long run will mean something to you in a way that all that work stuff, I mean, I love all the stuff I've been able to do as a journalist. But there's something about the stuff of my family, my friends, my niece. She's still sticking her tongue out at me 25 years later. And then we go from here to her wedding. And then she finally calmed down enough that I could shoot a picture at her wedding. But it's really meaningful, and it's the kind of thing that's a gift to you to be a photographer who's able to do that, who's able to make those pictures that, let's be honest, everybody else in your family have got their phones. Every now and then they'll get lucky, there'll be a good picture. But if you're the photographer in the family, don't waste it on, not waste it, but don't use it up on everybody else and not use it on your own family. Wisdom teeth. Frozen peas. So she became an actress, worked in Vegas, is now in New York. And she just played Edward Scissorhands in London for 3 months. And with that, got married a year and a half ago. If you're going to get a tattoo somewhere on your body, put it down where somebody has to work to see it, but make sure it's a speed graphic with a flash unit. Thank you.